November 5th, 1975 was just an ordinary work day. We thought, there were 7 of us cutting trees out in the forest, and we'd, put in a pretty hard day and were headed home when we saw a glowing object hovering near the road in the forest. I got out and went up to get a closer look at it and was hit by a blast of energy from the craft. My coworkers, thought the power of that was so great, throwing me through the air. They said my body landed like a sack of meat, like there wasn't a bone in my body. So they said that they were immediately yelling to each other that he's dead, he's dead. So they took off. And they went and tried to get some help, but and decided that they'd better return. They came back to see if they could rescue me. Took a lot of courage. I give them credit for that. But they had seen the craft leave, and some of the crewmen were saying their greatest fear was what my body was going to look like, because it was just such a powerful thing that happened there. But my body was no longer where it had fallen, and apparently, even to them, they believed that I had been taken. They went back to town arguing about whether they should report this at all, because they knew it was going to be very difficult to believe. But they finally settled on reporting it to the sheriff, and when the sheriff and his men interviewed the men, they said they were certain that something terrible had happened, that some of the men were still crying, but their suspicions that this was some kind of a crazy cover-up story for a murder began. So during the 5-day search for me, with the idea that perhaps I'd been stunned and wandered off in a daze and was out in the woods somewhere, on the one hand, and of course they were looking for a body to be hidden there in some place. And they brought in the tracking dogs from the local prison. They had a massive manhunt, 50 men on horseback, and people in aircraft and 4-wheel drives, and the men were accused of the murder and denied it, and said they'd take any test to disprove that, sodium pentothal, a polygraph, whatever. So they brought in the state police lie detector expert and tested the men. And when they passed, the sheriff was really quite surprised. And a lot of the lawmen, maintained the public posture that they didn't believe the story. But privately, it came out over the years that they eventually did become, quite convinced that what had happened really happened. But in the aftermath of that, UFO skeptics, I think some of them actually is self-styled defenders of scientific truth, or perhaps government disinformationists, launched an onslaught of a hail of different theories. A lot of them often mutually exclusive, contradictory, but anything that they could come up with to try to discredit it, explain it away as something that didn't really happen. Well, at the time that the men passed the polygraph tests, the president of the American Polygraph Association said the odds were over 1,000,000 to 1 of there being that many people passing tests on a single issue and there being any kind of an error in the testing. And so since that time, there's now been 16 past tests in connection with this incident. I've taken and passed 5 different tests from 3 different examiners, all of whom had the highest credentials, law enforcement experience. But for people who don't want to believe, I came up with the slogan, for those who refuse to believe, no amount of evidence is ever enough. For those who have experienced it, no more proof is necessary. When I was struck by that energy, it felt like an electric shock, like almost like a physical blow, and it was very powerful. And the next thing I knew, I was regaining consciousness. I didn't know where I was, but I gradually, once I was able to finally focus my eyes and see these creatures standing over me, realized that I had been taken aboard the craft. It was terrifying. Many things came together to run the fear factor up to the max because, first of all, to feel that I'm in the presence of alien creatures, of course, very strange to look into the eyes of an intelligent creature that's not human. Everything else surrounds that. That was a central thing. But the fact that I was having difficulty breathing, I felt like it was suffocating, like I couldn't get enough air. At the same time, the feeling that I was mortally wounded, that there was something very wrong inside. And it was claustrophobic because of the humidity, the warmth, the confined space, the dim lighting. All of that, made me feel trapped, and the feeling that I needed to defend myself or to flee, and feeling that I could barely move, that added to the feeling of panic. So all these things came together to make it interpreted as the most threatening event of my life. But as soon as I recoiled and backed away from them, and these three creatures were staring at me together, it gave me a very weird feeling, a very uncomfortable feeling in my head. And later, I figured out that probably what was happening is that they were trying to regain control of me, and it wasn't working for some reason, that somehow this stare is connected with their telepathic mind control, and it wasn't working probably because of lingering effects from having been hit by that blast of energy. And the medical testing that I underwent after I was returned sort of backs up that theory. I was put into a brain injury hospital for an electroencephalograph, and the technician was not informed of my true identity because there was so much hysteria surrounding the report of what happened. So being in there under an assumed name with a technician who did not know who I was, just that he was looking for signs of injury, made the discovery of these unusual brainwave patterns more significant because, he was, operating with no preconceived notions. Anyway, a lot of the medical testing, a lot of the scientific testing that went on at the site went directly to undercut and disprove a lot of the theories that were offered up to try to explain it all away. And it was a very trying times to be under the gun in that way and under such accusations. And for the crew too, from the beginning, the threat that in their minds that they might be, convicted of murder and jailed for it. They didn't know. They knew they hadn't murdered me, but it was a number of years with great difficulty, an onslaught of criticism, a change in people's attitudes towards us that was less than favorable. As time went on, we very steadfastly, fought back and refuted so many of these claims that acceptance began to increase. And through the years, there's always been a certain amount of people who won't believe it under any circumstances, but it's gotten better over time. But I found myself, as I logically, reasoned that probably that it wasn't a deliberate attack, that it was more of an ambulance call than an abduction. The circumstances all pointed in the direction that the only reason they had taken me aboard was to try to revive me and to correct some damage that was probably fatal. I wasn't connecting emotionally with that. Even though logically I realized that they were probably benevolent, emotionally I was still back in the situation of maximum fear, reacting to the feeling that I had right when I regained consciousness. The feeling of maximum threat, maximum fear. And even though intellectually I considered it differently, I was finding it extremely racking to retell the story. So, 5 or 6 years ago, I started working at trying to connect emotionally to my current understanding, so that the feeling I get emotionally in describing those events isn't as draining as it was initially. It's gotten a lot easier. But in addition to realizing that their intentions were probably not malevolent and probably, benevolent, quite fortunate that the crew didn't remain there and somehow recover my body, because it was probably damaged in a way that they couldn't have done anything to reverse or to treat. None of them knew CPR, and the nearest hospital was over an hour away. So I feel fortunate that I was taken aboard and revived. But in addition to that, I've had 40 plus years to think about what their agenda is, what their ultimate intention was. Some of the crew said it looked to them when I got out like I was in some kind of trance, like they think I was under outside control. And I said, no, it felt to me like it was my own, impulsive thing. But they said, well, if they have mind control, they can make you think it's your idea. So, we're at a stalemate on that issue. But overall, whatever their intention was, I think, in terms of the overall picture about UFOs in general, the wider picture with the whole presence, I did a lot of thinking. And it doesn't add up that they would have bad intentions with the things that we know. Now, the UFO skeptics were fond of saying, well, if there was anything to this, these craft would just land in the open somewhere and say, people of Earth, here we are. Well, that obviously hasn't happened. And but I make the point that on the other end of the scale, with the level of technology that such civilizations would obviously have, they would be capable of doing everything that they're doing here on the Earth and remain completely undetected. There would be no ufology. There would be no glimpses. It's not like they're stupid, like, ooh, we slipped up. The humans caught a glimpse of us again. But always to this exact degree, this little range of provability where the person or people who got a hold of these sightings or radar evidence, whatever it would be, would not have quite enough to create worldwide acceptance overnight. And the reason that's important is because such a thing would be very destructive. And it's not too hard to figure out what would happen if that sort of thing were to happen today. We talk about disclosure, like we would wish that the government would officially announce it tomorrow and tell everyone that there's alien technologies, civilizations visiting the Earth, and the potential that we could benefit from such advances in terms of, in many ways, in terms of technology and energy, would almost immediately be able to replace most of the use of fossil fuels. And the world economies are based on petrodollars. To overturn that overnight would be basically the collapse of the world economies. And that could generate a sequence of events that would be very, very hard to recover from for a long time. So the science fiction equivalent of the Prime Directive, non-interference directive, probably has its corollary in reality, and not just by the aliens, but maybe even to some extent, at least part of the motivation of our government's reason for the secrecy, that to come forward and announce all this wouldn't be all that beneficial. Now, of course, the government may have other reasons for secrecy, but some of that is, people presume is suggestive of some nefarious or kind of intentions that the people would highly disapprove of, but maybe not. There could be other reasons. So be careful what you wish for. There might be good reasons for secrecy, but at the same time, I am convinced that it is important for humanity to come to terms, and all of us come to understand that this is reality. It's important for them to know. It just has to be done gradually. That's the only qualification involved here. It's not total secrecy. It's not total blackout. It's, yes, this is true, but it has to be accepted in a way where people are taking it in stride, making the proper adjustments. So I think that's the intention of the aliens with their ongoing marginal, measured sightings where they're just enough that the person who saw it is certain, and maybe not every one of the people they try to relate that to. And but it all contributes to a gradual nudging in the direction of total acceptance. And there's also probably something else going on, that this nudging is for some understanding, some technological achievements, some sometimes small things, but some greater things. Nikola Tesla himself believed that some of his, or all of his discoveries were actually being channeled to him from extraterrestrials. And there's a huge number of people have gone on record in music, acting, scientific circles, where they received inspiration, a creative surge, a turning point in their life, that their UFO experience somehow gave them a little boost in a direction that's beneficial to humans. And so all of this, again, points in the direction that I initially concluded, that they're benevolent and have good intentions for humans. And so I think it's really important to realize that being hidden doesn't necessarily mean there's some bad intentions. It's pretty easy to reason that beings with that level of technology, if they wanted this planet to themselves, they could do so with little to no opposition whatsoever. They could eliminate every human on this planet and never fire a shot. We'd never know what hit us. The Hollywood picture of fighter jets and UFOs engaged in dog fights in our skies, never going to happen. It's no contest. Absolutely absurd that it'd be like a bunch of cavemen throwing rocks at an aircraft carrier. It's just not going to happen. So, it doesn't take much reasoning to realize that these civilizations, potentially being, thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of years ahead of us, if there was ill will involved, it wouldn't be much we could do about it anyway. In moving in the circles where UFOs are discussed, I used to really take with a grain of salt anything associating paranormal type events with this phenomenon. But as time's gone on, I've come to accept that it very well might be the case that these things are involved. And the key point here being that one of the major objections that our scientists have to an alien civilization making it here is just some simple physics involving time, distance, and space, that it would be very difficult to come such a great distance. It would take traveling very near the speed of light to do it in their view. However, there are many experimental physics theories that involve interdimensional kinds of things, alternative ways of looking at space-time and such things, that might be the means by which they get here. So if there's an interdimensional aspect to the travel itself, the idea that other kinds of things that seem paranormal to us are really just their way of dealing with the universe. And, that goes hand in hand with the idea, Arthur C. Clarke said, a sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic to us. And, this is quite true. Almost everything technological that we have today has been achieved in the last 200 years. But Michio Kaku makes the point that these star systems are so old that these civilizations could be literally millions of years ahead of us. And so you have to quit thinking of them in terms of being so marginally superior. And the history of science is full of pronouncements by scientists and other learned authorities saying what's not possible. Man could never fly. Man would never set foot on the moon. Lord Kelvin, the one who came up with the Kelvin temperature scale, recognized scientist of his day, made the solemn pronouncement of great certainty that man would never travel faster than 60 miles an hour because the air would all be sucked out of the conveyance and the occupants would suffocate. So, science has been proven wrong time and time and time again, especially when they say what's impossible. So you can't disprove a negative. What I'm saying is there's no way for anyone to say what's not possible, because if you don't know about it, you're in the dark about it. You don't know about it to start with. So yeah, there could be basic hardcore reality explanations for things that are labeled paranormal in connection with UFO sightings and contact. Over the years, I really took great exception to having had this happen to me, and the reaction that I got from a lot of people. And, I just wanted it to go away. I speculated with, just go silent. I tried that for a while. Or even as far-fetched as this would be, to come out and say, oh, we were all drunk that night, never mind, we just made it up. Anything to just make them go away. And, even though it wouldn't fit with the facts, and the people who want to disbelieve it would, have some basis for that and maybe leave us alone. But I never did. I couldn't bear the idea that this is something important. And I've come to realize how important it is for the world to know it, and to come to terms with it and to face it. So that's become my mission, my purpose for doing this. You know, during the times I ran away from this and just did ordinary work for a living, I made far more money than I'm making now. If I didn't have my steelworkers pension, I couldn't even be doing this. I'm doing this because, you know, I see it as my mission in life to try to promote understanding and to bring people closer to the day when they can accept the reality of our true place in the universe. So to that end, I took every single theory that the skeptics offered to try to explain it away and disprove them thoroughly in my book, Fire in the Sky, The Walton Experience. And the only place you can get that is through my website, traviswalton.com. There's a Portuguese edition and a German edition, but mainly it's just that and some other things that are available through my website. And there's also some additional information about my case there.